Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where we rank every X-Men story from A to Z.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Zach. And you know what that music at the start of our show means, Adam?
It means something amazing, Zach.
It means something spectacular, Adam.
It means something web of, Zach.
It means something Peter Parker the Spectacular, Adam.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Spider-Man this episode, right, Zach?
Did you run out of Spider-Man titles?
I was going to say Superior, but, we might as well just jump into it.
Because we got Superior, we got Avenging, I think was a thing. I think that's about it.
There's a lot of Spider-Man stuff.
Spider-Man uses a lot of adjectives.
Yes.
We're talking about Spidey today. I hope you've heard of him. He's very nice. They make waffles of him, and my son has eaten 8 of those today.
Ooh, I want to eat Spider-Man waffles. That sounds delicious.
They are very bad, but for some reason, he gets into weird eating habits. And today he just kept eating Spider-Man waffles. And since he is a small boy who is not overweight by any stretch of the imagination, and he's 2, I said, yeah, you're probably fine to eat.
You go for it, buddy.
But do you know why we're talking about webhead waffles and other assorted spiders men?
Well, I believe we have a Patreon request. Is that right?
We do have a Patreon request. Our pal, Nicole Raymond, went on over to patreon.com/XavierFiles. He decided that I being Nikolai here, want to support a show that I enjoy. So I am going to toss in as little as $2 a month and get an entire episode created around something that came out of my brain. This is something that Nikolai said was a story that he remembers when he was first getting into comics that he wanted to hear us talk about. And it's tangentially related to the X-Men because their name is in the title. And that is X-Men / Spider-Man from the year 2009. Not from 2099, as one of my co-hosts may have thought.
Yes, it was a little bit hilarious trying to find the X-Men 2099, Spider-Man 2099 crossover that does not exist. So it was a relief to know that I was looking at the wrong thing.
If there was an X-Men Spider-Man 2099 crossover, that would be stories 2 and 3 on this list. Let me tell you what, we'd be talking about that so hard. But sadly, they only had one kind of crossover, and it's not good, and it's technically an alternate version of 2099, so who cares?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of surprised that this particular 4 issues doesn't get into that because it covers 4 separate eras of X-Men and Spider-Man. It's an interesting way that they put it together.
Yeah, this is very similar to the Wildcats X-Men crossover in that it takes place during different eras. So you've got a Silver Age story, a Bronze Age story, a 90s story, and then at the time, a contemporary story. So a 2009 era. It tells a little bit of each thing, all going to this overarching plot thread of Kraven the Hunter. You're aware of Kraven the Hunter, right?
Oh, yes. The greatest hunter of all time, who Squirrel Girl recently convinced to go hunt sea monsters, I believe. But then he popped back up, but I haven't read the other arc that he was in.
Oh my gosh, Adam, it's so good. Guys, I don't talk about this a bunch, but there are 4 comics that I read that are not X-Men every month. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Ms. Marvel, Runaways, and Moon Knight, which is, in my past times, the last issue comes out tomorrow, so I'm no longer reading that every month. But Unbeatable Squirrel Girl is consistently charming and very, very good. And that story about Kraven the Hunter is good. I'm just going to say one thing about that Kraven the Hunter story for our fans. Adam, please plug your ears here because I don't want you to be spoiled on this.
La, 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 la.
Mojo 2, the sequel, shows up.
I couldn't help but hear that. That sounds awesome. Okay. So anyway, Kraven the Hunter is involved in this story. Mr. Sinister is involved in the story, and it does have a very weird sort of similarity to that Wildcats X-Men story that we read recently, because it involves Sinister collecting DNA through Kraven of the X-Men, and eventually creating a Kraven clone that's sort of a Sinister Craven clone. It's some weird
It's a
stuff.
combination of Craven, the original X-Men, Mr. Sinister, Carnage,
Hmm.
and it looks like Wolverine. Like it looks like Weapon H, but
Yeah,
worse.
yeah. So I want
We
to,
should mention that this was written by Christos Gage with
yes.
pencils by Mario Alberti.
Yeah, and I that's where I want to start is because I think the art here in all four issues is absolutely gorgeous. The amount of detail that's on every page is kind of astounding, um, and does a really great job of capturing the characters. I was very in love with the artwork in these issues. Even if the story is not like the greatest thing in the world, it's kind of cool to see an artist tackle these multiple eras for an overarching story.
Yeah, the art's really the selling point of this. They were even when they were publicizing this as kind of a prestige thing because Mario is a European, he's an Italian artist, uh, but he just hadn't done much for Marvel. I'm not sure he's done anything else from Marvel since.
Yeah, it has almost like a Mobius kind of look to it. It definitely feels a little European in the
Mhm.
designs of it, but it's just fantastic. So, I'm willing to forgive some of the emptiness of the story. It's really just an opportunity to kind of poke in to the different continuities of the X-Men and the Spider-Man. The first issue is, like you said, is Silver Age. Second issue, we just covered Mutant Massacre recently, and this is in the wake of that. The third issue is 90s X-Men, and then in the fourth issue, we get sort of the 2009 status quo.
Yeah, it's odd. I think so. I think for as good as the art is, the writing is equally not because I don't think it effectively captures any of those eras.
Hmm.
And I think the overarching plot feels very dumb. Like,
I was on board. I didn't hate it. I just think that once we get to a point where we are checking in with Ben Riley and Carnage, I'm like, where is this going? And
yeah,
that the culmination of this whole thing is how do you even pronounce it? It's Craven, but there's an X instead of a K.
Zraven,
Zraven, maybe.
X Raven.
Yeah, it's funny, but it doesn't feel like the kind of book that necessarily should be funny.
It's tonal whiplash. It really is. Like
Yeah.
to bring it back to Weapon H to
Mhm.
Hulkverine. Hulkverine was marketed way more seriously than the weapons of mutant destruction or whatever
Mhm.
uh played it up as. Like in context of the story, it's a little silly, campy story, but all of the covers and all the marketing played it up as Hulkverine is this big thing and this
Yeah.
real serious thing.
Mhm.
This is kind of the opposite problem. It plays up this story as a pretty serious prestige story, but the end result is Mr. Sinister makes a mutant hunter that is Craven and the original X-Men and Sinister and Carnage.
Right.
And it's
Which
very
then,
dumb.
yeah, and the resolution of the story is that the X-Men basically tease it to go and kill Sinister.
And it
Um,
was never seen again. I
right,
like to
right.
assume that he was Sinister and he looked at it and he said, "Well, you don't think I didn't have a contingency for you?" And it died. And he said, "Let's forget about this decades long plan I had."
Yeah. Yep. So overall, it's goofy. However, I think it's absolutely worth checking out for the artwork alone. I mean, it's just stunning. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. So where do you feel like it falls on this list?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of looking around at 90. We have X-Men versus the Agents of Atlas, which was another one with some really striking artwork, but was not exactly like the most memorable story of all time. Um, would you say it goes lower than that?
I think it goes lower than that. I think this from being an X-Men story is probably better than 102 which is, or I'm sorry, 100. Ugh, I can't read this list right now. Ultimate Spider-Man 66 and 67, Jump the Shark.
Okay.
I don't know if it's that much better than it though.
No. Well,
Like I think I like Generation Next from Phalanx Covenant more.
yeah. No, I would say that, especially because it's the lead into Generation X. I would almost say I like Negative Zone were better than this. How do you think it would stack up against like Phoenix Resurrection?
I think Phoenix Resurrection has some problems, but I think this is just a bit better than that overall.
All right. Well, then
The
that's going
art's
to be
very good. X Raven is very bad.
yeah.
Zaraven, Craven,
Yeah.
Shaven. Nope.
Fun story with maybe not the best payoff. So what does that make
Zaven?
us?
I think that's guys. Look, someone get Christos Age on the phone because I don't know how any of these consonants go together.
No, I don't either, but that's okay.
But I think this is our new number 93 on this list.
Yes.
Spider-Man / X-Men from the year 2009. So for our next two stories, they deal with a lot of minutia of Spider-Man history, and we're an X-Men podcast, aren't we, Adam?
Yeah, I feel like we could use a spider expert to Peter Parker explain to us what's kind of going on with Spider-Man in some different eras. Do we know anybody like that?
I think we do. I think that coming to us from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, we've got Dan Gvozden. Dan, how you doing today?
I'm doing really well, mainly because I'm here with you guys.
Welcome, Dan. Thanks so much.
Now, Dan, for people who don't know you or the Amazing Spider Talk, Superior Spider Talk, whole network of Spider-Man based fandom, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, and I love that you include even our name mix-up. Yeah, we are the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. That's kind of the main thing that we do. It's a bi-weekly show, meaning every other week. We do a show that kind of looks through the history of the character, starting from the very beginning. We're kind of in our third season now, or just starting up the third season, where we're dealing with kind of the transition to the Bronze Age. And we do new issue reviews of new Spider-Man comics, looks back at the history with guests from all the creators that have worked on Spider-Man. This series is going to be particularly Jerry Conway focused, and he's a big guest on our show. And so, that's our kind of premiere podcast is the Amazing Spider Talk, formerly known, as you said, as the Superior Spider Talk, because we started it in the Superior era, not realizing that we would go on to do it for as long as we have done it now, which is
these
5 years.
Never end as soon as you expect them to, do they?
No, I know. My co-host Mark said, like, if I'm still doing this in 5 years, something has gone horribly wrong. And you know what? I'll let history be the judge of that. But we're still going strong. So that's kind of our main podcast. We've got a couple of like spin-off shows that have born out of us. The Ultimate Spin, which covers Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen Stacy. And our new show, The Untold Talks of Spider-Man, which is a lot of like you guys. It's kind of diving into the like maybe forgotten comics of Spider-Man lore and kind of ranking them from, I guess, the ones that need to be reprinted and the ones that are best left untold. So,
well, and strangely enough, I know about that because I guested on that show not too long ago. So I'm familiar with that one.
Awesome. Yeah, those were great episodes. You did what books were you covering again?
I just did we did a Marvel team up annual where the X-Men meet Spider-Man. And it's really bad. It was really bad. The episode was great, but the issue was terrible.
Well, that seems to be a lot of the case for that show. I think they're doing Slingers Month right now, and I don't know. I know that one of the hosts is particularly in love with that book, but it is not a favorite of mine.
Oh boy.
Are you talking about the book where Spider-Man was accused of murder and then created 4 not Spider-Man identities? And then those identities became superheroes?
That exact one. It sounds like an X-Men plot if I ever heard one.
I've never read a single page of it, but as listeners of this show may remember or may not, it's more of a childhood memory of mine than something to be shared with all of you. But a lot of my X-Men fandom came from the DK Ultimate Guide to X-Men, which was this big color illustrated kids book that went over all of X-Men history, which frankly, as I say that out loud, sounds real daunting to give to a 10-year-old. But I also had the equivalent Spider-Man one, and I was fascinated by the concept of the slingers and what happened with it. Not fascinated enough to ever read it, but it said, oh, that Ricochet design kind of looks neat.
Well, that's so funny about it is like he created these like kind of throwaway costumes to throw the scent off of him, and like I always thought the intent was that the costumes looked terrible, like that was the whole idea, and yet they've got this life of their own. People love those costumes, so what do I know?
Hey,
well, what
lives
you
on
do
an
know about is X-Men. Well, probably not actually. Spider-Man. X-Men is our thing. I'm just very used to saying that word. And one of the stories we wanted you to maybe enlighten us a bit about is Spider-Man versus Wolverine by Jim Owsley and Mark Bright.
There is so much to talk about with this issue, especially in
boy.
terms of Spider-Man lore and behind the scenes drama. Actually, it's something we really got into on my show recently in our 200th episode, because we had the writer of this book, Jim Owsley, also known as Christopher Priest, on our show to talk exactly about this. But yeah, I mean, how familiar with this book are you guys?
Are you saying that Owsley is Christopher Priest? Did I
Wait, do you not know that?
I did not know that, but I'm a dumb
when he got divorced, he said something to the effect of, if I ever get divorced, I'm gonna become a priest or something, or his ex-wife did or something like that. And anyway, he took that to heart and rebranded himself.
Fascinating. I'm sorry, please continue.
Oh boy, if you didn't know that, then you are in for some interesting tidbits here.
This is a weird issue. This is a very strange one shot.
I mean, this is the first big meetup between, just Spider-Man and Wolverine. It digs into Wolverine's history a little bit. It has a very specific place in Spider-Man continuity because a lot of things happen here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got this kind of Mary Jane relationship that's going on where Peter doesn't really want to acknowledge that, she's his girlfriend. This is kind of right after she comes back into his life and tells him about her kind of sordid past with her family, and kind of tells him that she's known that he's Spider-Man. And you've got stuff with the Hobgoblin. You've got all kinds of things converging at once. The black costume, the red costume. Like, there's so much Spider-Man stuff going on in this book that whether it happens in this book or it happens as a result of this book, it ends up making this more than just a meetup with Wolverine, which is already very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to mention that Spider-Man murders someone.
I was going to say, that is the real takeaway from this book, is that Spider-Man clocks someone to death, albeit accidentally, but it's sort of sticking with him as we get to the credits there.
Right. Murder by Spider-Man is what we got here.
Yeah. So this is a story about, there is someone from Wolverine's past named Charlemagne, who he knew back in his spy days, who is resurfaced and gets the attention of the Bugle and of Spider-Man. So Spider-Man gets sent to Germany and ends up teaming up with Wolverine, who apparently it turns out that Charlemagne was a friend of his, and she is dying, and Wolverine wants to mercy kill her. Spider-Man doesn't like it, and then Spider-Man accidentally mercy kills her.
Yep, you nailed it. But one thing you're forgetting is Spider-Man takes a friend along with him on the trip. None other than Ned Leeds, and not Ned Leeds that you're thinking about from Homecoming, who's actually
not
Genki. Not Genki, yes. This is the actual Ned Leeds, husband to Betty Brant, Spider-Man's first love interest, who was, I guess, stolen away by Ned Leeds. And he, much suspected to be the Hobgoblin, comes along on the trip and is murdered, like off panel. Like Spider-Man comes home and
There
there's
he
dead
is.
Ned Leeds with his
Yeah,
neck slit.
that feels like it should be more important. Like I am not that familiar with this era of Spider-Man, but I know the Hobgoblin mystery was a big thing. I knew that Ned Leeds was, like not a minor character. He'd been a Spider-Man character for a while. It feels like killing a pretty significant supporting character should be more important than this.
It really should, but I can get into that rabbit hole whenever you guys are ready. But I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys think about this issue just overall.
Well, I think it's interesting in general, like where this falls on the Wolverine timeline. We're a year out from his volume 2 ongoing that then heads into the 90s. And we're digging into Wolverine's spy past, but it's very inconsequential. Like we're not really talking about a story with a lot of substance, as many Wolverine mystery backstories go. And the whole thing with Charlie it doesn't really ring true. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Zach, what do you think about that?
I think this is a bad comic, and Wolverine's kind of written like a dick in this whole thing. And I don't care about this backstory of this one spy that he knew. It's all weird. This is a weird story. Like Priest is better than this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general the thing is just kind of poorly written. Charlie's my best friend, but I don't see Charlie in a while. I save Charlie, it just that whole back and forth about who this character is, and we're never really given motivation as to why we're supposed to care about her. And then Spider-Man kills her. So it's more about Spider-Man and what his reaction is to having done this terrible thing than it is about that character and whatever her value was. So for this being 60 odd pages long, there's not a lot to it either, which is frustrating.
The X-Men are, I wouldn't say like a total blind spot for me. Like it's definitely something that I'm catching up on rapidly on my Marvel Unlimited. My knowledge of them really starts with the 90s cartoon and builds from there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm sure a lot of people have that similar story. And I've been working my way back. I'm actually reading the Stan Lee originating run right now.
I'm
As
sorry.
I'm trying to
That's
flesh
rough.
out there's a lot of weird sexism and stuff, but there's some fun things too. Like I just read the Blob issue and I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah, there's some good Silver Age villain stuff there, but the most of it's terrible.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. But I've not gotten deep into the Claremont stuff yet, so I guess my knowledge of Wolverine is in that era and its kind of rebirth is a little bit limited. So, like, I read this and I was like, well, I don't know if this is incorrect to Wolverine's character. Was he written this way? Is Charlemagne someone that I should know? Reading this as like a non-X-Men person, I thought, well, it's an interesting exploration into how these two characters are different in their approach and ideas about the world, but also have kind of like a shared trauma that kind of binds them together. The Spider-Man Wolverine team up has kind of become one of the classic ones in Marvel Comics.
Right.
I'm thinking about things like Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine, which I love.
Yes.
I don't know. So you seem to be answering my question, and maybe you can be more definite about it. Like, is Charlemagne someone we should know? And does his characterization of Wolverine ring true at all?
This issue really feels like it came out of the Spider-Man office and did not really check in on what Claremont was doing.
No, I mean, we're in an era where Wolverine still would have like disappeared during X-Men to go off on a side adventure, like he did for his mini with Frank Miller. But we're still slightly before where it's acceptable for Wolverine to be on the X-Men and still be in Madripoor all the time as his alter ego Patch, as happens in his ongoing.
Well, and I think what's important about this is
Yeah.
this would be before you get pretty much any backstory on Wolverine.
Yes. Yep.
Like this is before you even know that Wolverine fought World War II.
Right.
Like this is, that he was a secret agent once, and that's it.
Yep. Yeah. So you don't need to know any of this. This never comes back up, to my knowledge, and it's not particularly important or effective in talking about Wolverine or his backstory.
Well, that's funny because this moment very rarely comes back up in Spider-Man lore too. That he accidentally aided in someone's suicide by superhero. And except for like very few instances, like Dan Slott's No One Dies arc, where Spider-Man's kind of confronted by all the people that have died under his purview. There's this random character of Charlemagne that steps up and says, "You killed me," And I think for like the average reader probably reading that was like, what is going on? Like, he killed a woman? When did that happen? It's in this obscure, or maybe not so obscure, Spider-Man versus Wolverine comic from ages ago. So it has gotten referenced at least once or twice in other places, but I think most people like to kind of just like brush aside, like, Spider-Man doesn't kill and he hasn't killed. And yeah, this isn't really technically him trying to kill someone, although he admits that he wants to try to kill Wolverine, whether or not he would go through with it or not. So, I mean, on that aspect, that's very rarely brought up in Spider-Man history, although the rest of this book has huge ramifications for Spider-Man's history.
Yeah. Ned Leeds was like a bigger character than an off-screen death, right?
Oh, absolutely. He was for a long time. I wouldn't say he was like Flash Thompson, Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane level, but he was a consistent, like B character in the book, and his kind of marital issues with Betty are more like Betty's marital issues with him because she was constantly cheating on him, even trying to cheat on him with Peter, which is a whole other thing. But yeah, Ned was a pretty constant, character, especially at this point in time, because this was during the Hobgoblin era, and that was like everything in Spider-Man comics was the Hobgoblin. He's the hottest, character villain, big mystery for a long time, and Ned Leeds was one of the lead suspects. So just, like to kind of have him die off screen or off panel rather, was a bit shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm getting the sense that this isn't serving either fan base terrifically well. I think we might want to get into the ranking of this. So I'm kind of curious, and Dan, bear with us here because what I'm about to say is going to sound incredibly insane. Zach, how do you think this might stack up to something like the Wolverine sentient cocaine story?
This isn't as good as that.
No, it's not. I'm glad you said that because I know I've had to defend that story before. Dan, have you ever read that story?
No, I can't say that I have because I think something like that would ring a bell.
It's bananas if you get the chance.
Do you guys want to know about the editorial office stuff that went behind this book?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
I want that drama.
It's incredibly dramatic. Do you want me to have like a segue to that or just keep going?
This is Dan's hot take corner. Let's get the deep reporting here.
Okay, so this Ned Leeds thing would eventually kind of like unravel in like a huge way in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. But there's a lot of history that kind of goes into getting us to this point. Now I don't know, have you guys read Amazing Spider-Man in any kind of depth?
Not in this era.
The 80s stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you really ought to because it's really quite good. I would say one of the best runs of Spider-Man is the Roger Stern, John Romita Jr. run on the book. And it didn't last terribly long. It's like 20 to 30 issues or so. And one of the kind of like things that Roger Stern most famously did was introduce the Hobgoblin and the mystery behind who is the Hobgoblin. We see a mysterious figure discover one of the Green Goblin weapon caches that's hidden throughout the city and assume the mantle of this Hobgoblin that begins terrorizing everybody's lives in New York, and particularly around Spider-Man. And Roger Stern, he left a bunch of clues as to who this character was. He introduced this character, Roderick Kingsley, in the pages of Spectacular Spider-Man before he was the Amazing Spider-Man writers. And he was like this effeminate, like fashion businessman, who was in like an issue or two, and you wouldn't really think much of. But when he got on the Amazing Spider-Man, he reintroduced this character who would ultimately go on to be revealed in the 90s as the Hobgoblin. But in the meantime, Roger Stern's book was so huge, Marvel eventually told him, like, we want you to write the Avengers. So he gave up Spider-Man and went on to write the Avengers, and was followed up by Tom DeFalco writing the book and Ron Frenz doing the pencils. And they met with Stern, and Stern said, well, who do you think the Hobgoblin is? And Tom DeFalco put forward a guess, and Stern said, no, that's not who it is. It's Roderick Kingsley, this kind of effeminate businessman who has no real like superpowers or anything like that. And Tom DeFalco said, like, that doesn't make any sense. Like I don't really want it to be that character. And Ron Frenz and Tom DeFalco decided that the Hobgoblin was going to be Richard Fisk, Kingpin's son, who was kind of using it as a way to kind of like wage gang war on all these other gang leaders. The other one being this character named the Rose. Are you familiar with the Rose?
Isn't the Rose for Richard Fisk?
Well, that's the thing. The Rose ultimately ended up being Richard Fisk. But their plan was to make the Rose Roderick Kingsley, because the Rose is kind of a fashionista kind of guy, and he's kind of effeminate in some ways, and he's like always cutting roses apart and smelling them. It seemed to fit with the Roderick Kingsley character. And so they just said, this just makes so much more sense to have it like this. And so that was their plan for a long time. And eventually the group editor on the book changed, and Danny Fingeroth came to be the group editor on the Spider-Man books. And there was this new guy, Jim Owsley, who was this really young guy who they thought was a great talent. And Danny said, you know what? Like, I need some help on these Spider-Man books. I'll make him an editor and let him kind of, cut his teeth working on the Spider-Man books. All these books are being handled by such amazing professionals, including, like, say, Peter David on Spectacular Spider-Man, that, like, nobody could screw this up, right? Like, it'll really help him more than he'll be helping everybody else. But it became this huge battleground where Jim, aka Christopher Priest, decided, like, I'm the top guy here, and I can really, like, push my own weight around and really, make these books be what I want them to be. And he would get into these huge fights with Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. And Jim Shooter, like, told him a number of times, he reportedly says, to fire Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. And it became this, like, big battleground, and it all centered around this Hobgoblin reveal. And reportedly, Priest didn't like Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz's plans. And at the time, they were really fingering Ned Leeds to be the scapegoat for the Hobgoblin until they revealed their ultimate plan. So, Jim decided that he was going to just mess with them. So he wrote this book, Spider-Man vs. Wolverine, and for no reason, like, you guys have read it, Ned is kind of just randomly in there. Like, he doesn't serve much of a point to the overall story. Like, he just decides, I'm going to kill Ned Leeds just to screw with their plans.
Oh my God.
For their book. So he does, right? And then he decides, like, Tom DeFalco said, and he fires them right before doing this book, right? Okay, because Tom DeFalco says, if he had done that when I was writing this book, I would have killed him. So then Peter David gets, brought onto the book and is told, like, you're going to clean up this mess. Who do you, think that the Hobgoblin should be? And Peter David had been working on this story about the Foreigner, and he said, well, it should be the Foreigner. the foreigner should be the hobgoblin. And, Jim, in this deep mess now, says, well, it can't be the foreigner because the pitch to the fans was that the hobgoblin was a character that had always been around since, like, it had been a character that was in the established, gallery of Spider-Man characters, when the first Hobgoblin story was released. And the foreigner was too new for that. So it couldn't be the foreigner. So they came to an agreement. Ned Leeds would be the hobgoblin, and the people that killed him would be the foreigner and his gang.
Oh
So
my
then
God.
Peter David writes into Amazing Spider-Man, much to the hatred of everybody involved, especially Roger Stern, that Ned Leeds was always the hobgoblin. And what we saw in the pages of this book was him after the foreigner had confronted him about being the hobgoblin and killed him. So you've got this multiple year story that everybody was excited about, the hobgoblin being resolved off panel and in like a retcon.
Wow.
Yeah. Now it wasn't until the 90s that Roger Stern came back with Ron Friends and they allowed him to clean up the whole mess and make it Roderick Kingsley again with the help of his brother, who's not his twin but kind of is. It's complicated, but it's much better than it ultimately was. But this book was like a linchpin of like that whole undoing, and Tom DeFalco and Ron Friends kind of being booted off of the Spider-Man series. Now, ultimately, they would go to work on Spider-Girl for 100+ issues together. But like they had one of the best runs of Spider-Man brought to an end for no real apparent reason. So yeah, like this book is like a linchpin in that story, in the Spider-Man getting married saga. Like all of this is like born out of this one random team-up book.
Wow. So not only are both of these characters kind of written a little bit off, but this is sort of like editorial and writer revenge, to sort of get even, to figure out what's going on with these characters. That's crazy.
This must be how my wife feels anytime I talk about X-Men. Because
did I totally lose you?
I mean, I followed it.
That.
But
I followed that.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope I didn't bore people. I know that it can
No.
be a lot, but Mark and I, it's one of the biggest, he's my co-host. It's one of the biggest mysteries that we've been seeking to kind of like unravel on our show since like the 3rd episode of our show. We've been interviewing people involved with this, and we could never get Christopher Priest to talk about it until we kind of tricked him into talking about it for our 200th episode at a con. And he went on the record and was like, I never planned for Ned Leeds to be the hobgoblin, but it ended up being that way. And it's like, well, yeah, but you need to take some responsibility.
That's a whole thing.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you for that oral history, man. That was pretty intense.
Yeah. And meanwhile, when we were talking to him, Ron Friends was like an aisle over from us, like seething in anger. So, it's complex.
I love it.
More for that, like that on the Amazing Spider Talk, if that vaguely interests you.
So
that's fascinating. That's fantastic.
Now that you said all that about the book, Zach, I'm starting to look at a different part of the list, which is at 121. We have that X-Men versus the Avengers thing that had all of that editorial weirdness around it, with the writer switch on the 4th issue. Where are you looking on this list?
I was looking pretty much right there.
Okay. All right.
Because this is I was looking around there. I don't think it's as good as X-Men versus Avengers.
No,
and more because of this list, it's not as good because this is an X-Men focused list, and the X-Men side of this is written not great.
Yeah.
But I think this is probably better than like the Children of the Atom story at 126.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Is it better than Quanon, which is another ridiculous retcon?
No, I think the Quanon stuff is still like, it's dumb, but it has some fun to it. But this might be better than Storm Volume 3, Number 3, Life, Death 3. Yeah,
perfect. It can be our new number 124 on our list. Spider-Man versus Wolverine.
Wow, man, we just learned a lot. So thank you for that.
I'm so glad I could bring it to you.
Yeah.
That's
And we have
fantastic.
one more Spidey story here that involves an X character. So
And
what's the last one?
Dan, you actually suggested this one. This is not one I had read, but this is Amazing Spider-Man number 92, When Iceman Attacks by Stan Lee and Gil Kane.
I like this one because it's a bit of an oddity. This is during the Stan Lee, John Romita senior run of Amazing Spider-Man, but you got towards the end of the run some of these fill-in artists, and here you've got Gil Kane doing his first, kind of early work on Spider-Man, and you've got an X-Man showing up for the first time, if you don't count Quicksilver, in the pages of a Spider-Man comic, or at least
Okay.
Amazing Spider-Man.
I
And
believe they showed up in an early Marvel team up with Spider-Man.
right, I'm talking about Amazing Spider-Man proper.
Right. Sure.
Marvel team up stuff, it's such a loose continuity thing. Sometimes it counts, it seems. I don't really know. But for me, like reading Amazing Spider-Man, this is kind of like the first real Spider-Man, like one-on-one team up with an X-Man. But I don't know. I mean, whatever. History is history. Yes, there was a comic with them together prior to this, for sure.
Yeah, and this is sort of amazing friends without Firestar. So we get to start establishing this friendship here. I like this issue quite a bit. I think that what I liked about it wasn't necessarily the fact that Iceman is there, because he's sort of
Iceman's worthless in this.
Yeah, he's just sort of a stand-in antagonist. But we talk regularly about this issue of people claiming that comics were apolitical at some point, and this is a great example of why that is just such an idiotic statement. This whole story with Bullet and the Daily Bugle staff taking it to him and really digging deep on his backstory, that's the highlight for me here is them calling him out on this stuff. I really enjoyed that part of the story.
Right. This is like Stan Lee getting into his, most political. A few issues later, like we would get, Stan Lee breaking the comics code for the drug issues and things like that. Like he is really kind of like, this is like part of his most dialed in regards to, like these kind of things. There's like the Crisis on Campus issue that's, around this time, where it's about like riots on Empire State University's campus.
Right.
And we get a lot of race issues, and you get a little bit of that here. I think it's less defined than that, but like it's definitely like a Richard Nixon criticism in this book. You've got this kind of corrupt DA, Sam Bullitt, or he's running for DA, who is running on Law and Order. Sound familiar? To me, that's the highlight of this issue. Did you guys go back and read issue 91 by any chance?
I didn't get a chance to, though. I will say reading this issue made me say, I should probably go read the Stan Lee Spider-Man stories. I hear they're pretty good.
They are my favorite. They're so great. And you can listen into our show and follow along. Like plug. Here we go. That's my favorite part of this issue. But I think it is notable that you've got like this kind of Iceman. And in many ways, this feels like a Marvel team-up book other than the Stan Lee isms. Like you've got the classic misunderstanding that ultimately leads to, a team-up between these characters. I was curious to hear from you guys, since I've read this issue so much, like about the depiction of Iceman and his powers in this. Was this contemporary? Like, was this an upgrade for the character?
Well, I think it's interesting the timing of this. So this comic came out in 71, which at the time, X-Men wasn't being published. Not as a monthly series. It was in reprints.
Right.
So I mean, Marvel had no idea what to do with the X-Men at this point. They were a failed property. They knew some of the later stuff sold pretty decently after it got canceled. So they didn't want to immediately kill everything, but they didn't know how to revive it. And they would stay in that limbo until 75. Now, Iceman in particular, I think they saw, hey, we could probably use this character somewhere. So that's where you start to see him getting thrown on things like the Champions, a couple of
Right.
years later.
Yep.
But it's them trying to keep the property, gauge any interest they had. I know there was a chart that was floating around a while ago that was like mid 70s. Who are our important characters at Marvel? Like, who's our A characters, our B characters, our C characters? And it ranks them all. And Spider-Man's number one. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. But the X-Men are all pretty much at the bottom of the list, except for Beast, who's slightly higher because he was on the Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this was interesting. It's Stan writing Iceman again, but he's Silver Age Iceman and doesn't have too much of a character. He's Johnny Storm, but with ice.
Yeah, and
that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, here in 2018, I think many of us are going back and looking at Silver Age Iceman, and starting to look for some of the things that maybe Bendis was looking at that preceded his, decision to go ahead, and bring Bobby out of the closet. So to have Bobby starting this date, starting, his appearance here on a date, and then quickly sort of throwing his date into a cab and changing into Iceman and getting away from her is an interesting scenario. We often see Bobby sort of being awkward around women, awkward around girls, and it's just an interesting moment for the character before he gets into costume.
And 100% Bendis would have read a comic like this multiple times, given his, work on Ultimate Spider-Man and kind of pulling and updating, Stan Lee's run in many ways, and the X-Men were such a big, factor in Bendis's Ultimate Spider-Man run. We have multiple arcs with them. I got to think he would look back to an early Spider-Man X-Men team up to kind of, see, what was the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you what, my favorite part of this issue is not necessarily Spider-Man. It's not necessarily Iceman. It's J. Jonah Jameson Jr. He's very good at this.
I always like the issues where Jonah is allowed to not be just a blowhard. Like, you see that he's got some kind of moralistic fiber that he can, swing around with the same kind of gusto that he attacks people, like, with, or particularly Spider-Man with. Like, he can be a force for good as much as he could be a force for nuisance for Spider-Man. And especially channeled through his partner, Robbie Robertson, it allows Jonah to be kind of like a forgive me, social justice warrior.
Yeah. Well, it gives both of them a chance to shine here a little bit, and especially that scene where they confront Bullet and talk about supporting Nelson for DA, I think is really great. It's also kind of fun to read that, seeing Foggy run for DA in Daredevil season 3 that just came out. So it's a great
thank
scene.
you, Adam. I didn't know that was happening.
Me neither. Thanks, Adam.
What episode are you on? Come on,
we
guys.
just talked about this. I'm only on episode 3.
All right,
I haven't watched any of it yet.
It happens in like the next episode. You're fine.
Okay.
It's not a huge plot point. I'm sorry.
My life is ruined.
This is coming out. This is coming out on Thanksgiving. Everyone will have watched it by then.
Yeah, guys. No, this is a spoiler because we live in the far, far past. We live in the before times where Daredevil's been out for 4 days.
That's right. It's been out for like a week. All right. Anyway,
it came out on Friday.
Did it?
Anyway.
All right. Sorry. More free time, I guess. I like this story. I like it as a Spider-Man story. I don't know if I love it as like an X-Men story, but it's really fun. So where do you think this goes on our list, Zach?
I think this is better than Spider-Man versus Wolverine.
Definitely. So I'm going higher than that. We have...
I think we would all agree that this is better than the first 2 issues of Spider-Man and the X-Men, which some of us may have read recently on accident.
Yes. Sauron turning people into dinosaurs. So where does that put us? We're up into the hundreds.
Ooh, here's a good one. Is this
100.
better or worse than number 82, Web of Spider-Man Annual number 2? Which is the one where he teams up with Warlock.
That's an interesting comparison too, because Nocenti is kind of getting a little political there, as she always does, but about the animal rights issues. And this issue has a similar political feel. I mean, that has that awesome Art Adams art. It's a really fun Warlock showcase. I think that might be a little bit better for my tastes,
I
but
like
they're
Warlock better
very,
than Iceman, so
yeah, they're very comparable. So, um, I guess the next question would be, is it better than the Jim Lee 275 era? I don't know if I could put it ahead of that.
Here's what I'd say.
Yeah.
This is about on par with the Continuities issue of X-Men First Class.
Yes. That's a good place for it. Right in
I'd
there.
say right below that, above Men, because the art in here is real better than early Liefeld.
I'm sure you could hear some people arguing about all Liefeld, but that would not be me. So we're putting The Amazing Spider-Man number 93 at 87. All right.
Number 87. That is absolutely right.
Awesome.
And that is 3 up, 3 down. That is the end of this episode. I want to thank Dan so much for jumping in and providing a ton of fantastic insight on the history of the Spider-Man, the Spider-Man, I guess.
You gave me an opportunity to talk about Spider-Man and Wolverine's complicated history. So the thanks is coming from me.
Well, it's been great to have you. Now, if people were intrigued by all of the insight on the Spider-Man history that you dumped on us, where could people go to get more of that? Where can people find you?
Yeah, well, check us out on the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, which is found pretty much everywhere fine podcasts are found. I'm not saying ours is fine, but it will be there. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Sup Spider Talk, which ended up working out as my Twitter handle, even though it was intended to be Superior Spider Talk. It's now just Sup Spider Talk. So who'd have thought that would all work out this way? Yeah, and I kind of like talk about all things Spider-Man and break down like Easter eggs I'm finding in the new issues by Nick Spencer that are really there to test webheads like myself.
That's awesome. That is great. So yeah, guys, go check it out. I can tell you from experience, it's a pretty neat podcast and a pretty neat whole social media empire to take a look at. Now, Adam.
Well, thanks. That's really nice of you.
Oh, no problem. Now, Adam, where can the good folks find you and all of your assorted stuff and or things?
All right, guys. You can always follow me on Twitter at Arthur Stacy, and we still have new pages of Bish and Jube's Attack on the Mansion every X-Men Monday at adamrec.tumblr.com. Zach, where can people find you?
People can find me and all of my assorted stuff and or things at xavierfiles.com. That's where you can get all the latest X-Men news, some articles, maybe this podcast. It's just stuff. You've seen it at this point. You can also follow me on Twitter at xavierfiles, where there's a lot of X-Men stuff. There's a lot, guys, and I talk about it sometimes. But beyond all of that, you can also, if you liked what you heard, go on over to patreon.com/XavierFiles, like Nicole Raymond, who requested that X-Men Spider-Man story. That kind of kicked off this whole episode, this whole escapade about different X-Men and Spider-Man team-ups. And I guess times they fought each other. But you can check that out. If you want to be like Nikolai, you can go over and subscribe at the $2 a month or higher level, and we'll make a whole episode around you. It'll be pretty neat. You should do it. But I think that that about wraps it up. Dan, one last time, thank you so much for being on. It was a real pleasure.
It was really fun, guys.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Until next time, this has been... Wait, what are we covering next time? We should probably mention that to the people. Oh, we're talking about the Acolytes. Have you heard about them, Adam? There's a lot.
Yes, there are a lot of acolytes, and I don't remember all their names. So
I was talking to a friend of the show, Luke Hare, about Senyaka today, which I was able to spell on my first try, which tells me I know too much about the Acolytes.
I think I can properly spell Amelia Vogt So I think I'm doing okay there.
And this kind of discussion is why I have to listen to the show, because I have no idea who any of these people are.
Most
they're
people don't.
Magneto's evil worship group. They're kind
Which
of like
one?
Magneto's praise band.
Oh.
They worship Magneto as opposed to just following him. It's a whole thing. 90s X-Men is buck wild.
90s everything is buck wild. We don't even want to get into 90s Spider-Man.
No.
Well, that's great. Until next time, guys, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience.
Spider-Man!